aspect of this debate. And I would personally like to ask Matt how effective you think the government's plans of bringing in the option of actively opting in for householders to access adult materials on their household computers is actually going to succeed in protecting children from porn predators. And finally, we have John Whittingdale, Oakley MP. John is the MP for Malden, and it's a region he has represented in Parliament since 1992. It is a matter of great pride for us that John sits on the Film Association's Council. John is the chairman of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee and has led the committee's investigation into the News of the World vote hacking scandal. Speaking to politics.co.uk in May, John is quoted to have said that one of the reasons Lord Levison had only devoted a page or so to the internet in his massive report was, and I quote, "not because the internet is not important, it plenty is, but because it is very unclear as to actually how much you can do to control it." So, ladies and gentlemen, let us get on with the debate, after which I will open the floor up for some questions. And I'd like to ask Nick Pickles to start the debate, please.
We had the classic discussion earlier on of who got to go first, and I thought I'd managed to avoid that responsibility, but I think this morning we had a discussion about the Communications Data Bill and freedom of speech online with a particular regard to international moral authority of Britain. And I think that's a very important starting point for this kind of debate, because it's not that anybody is saying we should have an absolute Wild West with no regulation. But at the same time, the internet has been the single most transformative introduction to civil society since the printing press. And so when we start to take steps to regulate it and to bring government into that space, we have to think very carefully about how, not only at home, those powers will be used, but how we set an example to the rest of the world. Because even before the Edward Snowden revelations, there are countries who are trying to create a siloed internet, where citizens in their own country do not have the same access to the same information as citizens in other countries. And so when we say we want to control the access to content, we have to remember that our system and our approach may well be copied by countries that we would not regard as either allies or democratic. So remembering the role of due process, remembering the role of values, is very, very important. And I think that the starting point from that, for me, means that what is illegal online is illegal offline. And when the police get involved on the street, the same criminal offences apply on the internet. And those criminal offences have emerged over time, and they've stood the test of time, and Parliament has debated them. And I think we need to be very, very careful to rush to say the internet is somehow different, so therefore we should have different criminal offences and different priorities. And that's where the parenting debate starts. Parents have always had to protect their children from things that were dangerous. Some parents chose to have discussions about sex at an early age. Some parents chose not to discuss contraception. And those debates have always happened. So the idea that we can immediately click our fingers and go, there's a technology solution to what is a parenting issue, is something that we need to be very, very careful about. So whether you're talking about criminal activity in the predators, or whether you're talking about access to pornography, the fundamental questions are still the same online and offline. If people are breaking the law, it's law enforcement we want. It's easier to filter a website. But if that website is hosting images of a child being abused, I don't want the website filtered. I want the people making the content arrested. And I think something we've got to be very aware of is it's easier to filter, so we should filter more as a justification for not taking direct law enforcement. I think the announcement yesterday about massively upskilling in terms of cybersecurity, the British government's abilities, is a very important announcement in that regard. The second point is values. Now, the problem with the internet is that if you do want to get into a situation of genuinely trying to protect people from themselves or from others, privacy becomes a real problem. The only government that has ever managed to properly come anywhere close to controlling what people see online is China. And the only way that system works is because it's underpinned with a huge degree of surveillance to a point where China has more people watching internet traffic than we have police officers. There's a huge amount of surveillance there. So I guess my final point then, perhaps given we are a Conservative conference, the most important one, the choice of when the state intervenes in people's lives is the single most important decision that Parliament can take. And we need to be very, very careful of thinking that there is a legal solution and you can legislate for something that actually is much better moved by demand. And I think if you talk to a company like TalkTalk and said, has offering parental filters been a very useful marketing tool to sell products? Actually, the market has driven demand, not legislation. And I think we need to be aware of how the market can do things for good and protect people online, because the demand is out there. So rather than using the heavy, often crude form of legislation, we can actually give people an informed choice and then let parents and the market drive a better solution than the dead hand of the state strangling the greatest opportunity for an open society we've had for generations. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Shall we then... Yes, can we have a
I was about to say by the man of beer who clapped, but I'm not very expensive round, so that's all.
Can I then ask Paul to speak, please?
I just thought I'd start off by telling you where I'm coming from ideologically on this issue. And 10 years ago, when I was getting married, I didn't get a formal prenup, but my wife wanted 2 promises from me. I was looking towards for a business to get into, and she made me promise that I wouldn't get into arms dealing or pornography. And she knows me quite well. I chose blogging in the end. I think it was David Willits who said there's no such thing as a libertarian father with teenage daughters. And my girls are 8 and 6. I can now sense where he's coming from. I'm still a libertarian, but I'll come back to in 5 years on that if I'm here. I password protect my laptop, and that's partly because I don't want lighters on there all day, and probably more so, I'm worried that if they Google cheerleaders, they might discover more about Daddy's browser history than I'm really comfortable knowing. When they do actually get their own laptop, I will supervise it. There's no way they're going to have that laptop in their bedroom. I don't want them dancing around in front of a webcam at any point, whatever they are. So that's downstairs. And I think it's the job of parents, mum and dad, to supervise it, not for Nanny Maria Miller to look after us. She could do it, a person big system, but I don't think it would work. My kids simply will not be allowed to have unsupervised access to the internet. They won't have private passwords. I'll be in their email, I'll be on their Facebook, I'll be intervening in their instant messaging until they either get to university or possibly until they get married. That's I wouldn't let my daughters wander around a red light district on their own unsupervised or even supervised. And I'm not going to let them wander around the internet unsupervised. On the other hand, there is no technology devised or can be devised by anyone in Silicon Valley that will come between a 15-year-old boy and pictures of naked girls. So I think that these ideas that people are having for a technological solution won't work. Even China, dissidents get around all the protection in China. Saudi Arabia, I think they're still looking at pornography. On the other hand, I do think the industry titans, the Googles of the world, have devised ways of tracking copyright violations because they've had financial penalties. And Universal's come after them to sue them for billions. And pretty quickly, the internet titans, Google, Microsoft, have figured out ways of doing copyright protection and digital rights management. I think those same technology, those tools can be used to help in the war against child pornography. I agree with Louise Mensch for once that a child porn picture is a crime scene picture, and I'm quite happy to see an encouragement. I don't really think the big internet software providers and the ISPs and those kind of companies need much encouragement. They're keen to show willingness. Cracking down on the fight against child porn is something that everyone has an interest in, and I think that's the direction the industry should go, and that's the main priority we have. That's my thoughts.
privacy. And we sort of have this idea, if you read the front of the Daily Mail, that we can just sort this out technologically, and if only Google made more of an effort, there would be no child porn on the internet. And that's a lovely paradise, except it ignores the fact that even if Google devoted its entire machinery to solving this one problem, it wouldn't work. And even if it was Google's problem, most child porn isn't on Google. So I think we sort of, the reason I open with that is not necessarily because I think it's the whole of the debate, but I think it underlines how confused and how sort of nonsensical at times this debate has become. It's almost as though all the people, one of the requirements of joining in on this debate is that you don't understand the issues that are involved, which is frustrating for those of us that at least think we understand some of them. I'd look at Nick's point of view, where you sort of say, well, actually, you don't want the internet filtered, you want people arrested. I'm not sure it's such an either or. I think, of course, you want to stop the material that provides the raw material, if you like, for what everyone finds repellent. But of course, at the same time, you also want to be able to live in the real world and acknowledge that this stuff will happen anyway. In a global web, of course, you're going to get a whole load of material that you can only act on after the fact rather than before. So let's be pragmatic about that. Do we want to at what level do we want to filter it? Well, so Paul argues that he would filter his kids' access to the internet very, very heavily. The sad thing is that won't work either, as you sort of acknowledge. Your children of whatever age will start to push those boundaries as soon as they possibly can. So again, it's actually about having a grown-up conversation. And I think where we are moving to gradually is a sense that the media is being marginally more responsible, or at least some of us are, and we are moving towards a sense that this is actually, in large part, access to adult material on the internet is just another part of growing up, and we need to get to a stage where parents don't feel so uncomfortable with their kids using the web that it has to be locked away in their bedroom until they get married, which I appreciate you're exaggerating slightly. But the sad thing is, if you only let kids use the web under your supervision, you may in fact be delaying the amount of time it takes for them to get married, because you're probably going to restrict the online dating bit of it as well. Anyway, that's a side point.
That's a bad thing.
So I think what all I would argue for is a greater modicum of pragmatism in this debate. We know that we can't technologically solve the problem. We know that we can't arrest every paedophile before they actually commit an offence, because that would be a different kind of police state that Nick would rail against. So I think what I would argue is we need a mixture of technological solutions that, as has been said, are a great marketing tool for a lot of businesses. We need a state that is prepared to intervene at a certain level. We need a debate about where that level is, and we need parents who understand the internet far more than they do currently. And the one thing that I would end on is that we also underestimate the state of flux that this debate is in, because we do live in a world where now the majority of parents freely admit to not having the faintest idea what their own kids do at the extremities of the internet. Now that is a different dynamic from the one that Paul is inflicting on his kids, because I think Paul probably does understand a bit about the internet. So those discussions will be more sophisticated with Paul and his kids than they would have been with my parents trying to explain to me what the internet was, which didn't really take very long because they hadn't the faintest idea. So I would end on that sense of let's not pretend that we can set any of this debate in stone, and let's also not pretend that those little bits that we do try and set in stone are actually going to stay where we think they are for very long.
Thank you. There is a fine tradition of the Freedom Zone that, whereas in Parliament I'm usually seen to be on the free market end of the spectrum, a libertarian who doesn't like state intervention, the Freedom Zone always find a subject to discuss. Usually it's the BBC, where they put me up with a load of people who make me look incredibly left-wing and interventionist. So putting me next to Guido Fawkes and Big Brother Watch is probably going have the same effect. I first of all begin that the internet has been a revolutionary force for good, and I am instinctively opposed to censorship, and I also question its possibility. However, having said that, those are two separate questions. First of all, is it desirable to have some ability to protect people from content which is going to be damaging or harmful? The easy one is child pornography. There's probably, Paul has set out as a father why he wants to protect his children, and there is some stuff which I think nobody would say should be disseminated. It is a crime scene, as it's said, it is the extreme act. It becomes harder when you move beyond that. It's very easy to confuse the debate about pornography between the material which nobody should be allowed to access, which is largely going to be child pornography, but also extreme obscenity, and then the material which is perfectly all right for an adult who chooses to see it. On the other hand, we want to protect our children from coming across it, and that's where the issue around filters come in and age verification. But then you go beyond that, and it gets a little more difficult each time. A lot of the areas I've looked at as a select committee chairman have actually involved the internet and whether or not it is possible or desirable to control. Suicide websites. Young teenagers who go on, find people who encourage them to go and kill themselves and to tell them the best way of going about doing so. Extremist hate preaching, people who are whipping up jihadist extremism, advocating terrorist actions, and again telling people how to carry out terrorist acts. I think in each case, most people would say, yep, that's unacceptable, we should intervene. Parliament is about to legislate to license online gambling. All operators offering online gambling products, UK consumers will require a license. That's in order to ensure that people who gamble have a degree of protection. They know that they will get their money. If they actually do win, they will be able to have a protection against addiction. But of course, outside of that, there will be all sorts of unlicensed sites which offer none of those protections. So what do you do? There's no point in licensing if you can't actually do something to stop people going to unlicensed sites. So should we look at ways of trying to prevent the unlicensed site operators? And then the most difficult, which is one I produced a rather large report on about 2 weeks ago, which is the issue of piracy and copyright material. The music industry, the film industry, the games industry is all suffering from pirated content being made available from websites offshore, indeed often in other contents. And Parliament has spent a long time debating whether or not it is desirable or possible to try and block access. The media, having been very critical, are now moving behind paywalls for a lot of their content. If they are to protect their content and enforce paywalls, they're going to need some kind of mechanism to stop people ripping that off too. So generally my view is that there is a case in some instances. Then is it possible? Well, yes it is. If people agree it's desirable. So the best example is the Internet Watch Foundation, which is extraordinarily successful because all the ISPs agree that if material is identified as containing child pornography, then that will be taken down if it's hosted in the UK or access blocked if it is outside the UK. Similarly, the BBFC operate a voluntary system where providers of streamed video content can ask to have their material age rated with appropriate warnings, and that is displayed on the screen. But there will be some who will always find a way of getting around this. There is the deep net, the dark web. There's something called Tor, which is a software system which allows you to access material almost guaranteed anonymity. And there will be those who are technologically savvy who know how to go about doing so. That is going to be a matter principally for the police, GCHQ, and hopefully people who are even better at getting around that technology than we are. But for the most part, the vast majority of people will go on Google, or they will just use a web URL which they're familiar with, and those are the people who we can deter through a number of ways. Whereas the potential of website blocking, which we've looked at through the Digital Economy Act, and is already in operation through the IWF, whereas Google itself, so that when you do a search term, it doesn't produce inappropriate or illegal sites, it produces legitimate ones, and That's particularly an issue for piracy. You can get at these sites through payment mechanisms. Most of them are only there to make money. And to make money on the internet, you usually have to use a credit card. And therefore you talk to Visa and MasterCard. And I've spoken to Visa and they are very much engaged in that kind of discussion. And lastly, there is advertising. Again, they make money through advertising, and you can tell advertisers not to advertise there. So there are ways of doing it, and in my view, there are cases where it is desirable. But as ever, we need to ask the question first about whether there is any alternative, or whether it really is necessary for the state to intervene. And therefore, for that reason, I've always taken the view that we should concentrate on the areas which everybody agrees they are undesirable, rather than straying outside of that into the areas where there is a legitimate debate, because that way you will lose consent and it becomes ever more difficult.
Very much. So we've now got about 20 minutes or so for questions. Can I just ask, just by show of hands, how many of you actually do want to ask a question? Excellent. So I was going to do 20 minutes or one, but I was going to take it in clusters, but let's go with you, Sam. Yes, if you could wait for the microphone to get to you. And if you could state your name, please.
Hello, my name is David Allison. I'm Chairman of Freedom to Choose. I'm also a lifestyles and health correspondent for Training Central. Sorry, this isn't specifically 2 questions, but it's really sort of 2 points. First of all, John, can I pick up